Who has a passion project? And I'll define that. I think you all probably know what a passion project is in your heart. You know, you don't do it just because somebody's paying you to do it or because somebody asked you to do it. It's something that you just sort of feel like you have to do. There's a calling, it's a fire in your belly, and that you've actually been able to accomplish it. I'm kind of curious. Who has that? Oh, this is great. I totally know. Okay, now I'm going to ask, and you can raise your hand twice here. So now a passion project that has been sitting on the back burner and you're like, I'm going to get around to that, and year after year, I'm going to get around, I'm going to do that, I'm going to hike Mount Everest, I'm going to finish that book, I'm going to whatever. Who has one of those? Okay, okay. So the first group is hope that it might be the same. I raised my hand twice actually, so there is hope. So I believe you'll get it done. There's Zora Neale Hurston has this great book called Their Eyes Were Watching God. And the beginning of chapter 3, she starts out saying there are years that ask questions and there are years that answer. And for me, my passion project has been 15 years of asking questions. And this year is the year that answers for me. And it just feels really good. My passion project was teaching blind and visually impaired students photography. And the basics are that it was in North Carolina at Governor Moorhead School for the Blind. It was a volunteer project, and it was a state school for the blind where students came from all over North Carolina and lived in residence. It was back in 1992. And the reason I did it, people ask, the reason I did it was because I was afraid of losing my eyesight. I had worked as a photographer and a visual artist. And it's like a pianist losing their fingers or something like that. I was wondering how would I be able to continue doing photography, and then I figured I'd probably still be able to do it. And then I wondered, well, kids who grow up, you know, and are visually impaired probably aren't even encouraged to use a camera to communicate. They're probably just given Braille writers, and why wouldn't that be a good thing to try? The second one is how do they do it? And we basically gave them point-and-shoot cameras that did the focus and the exposure for them already, and they would listen to their environment around them. They would use their other senses. They would feel, they would ask questions about the room or what's going on, and we called the program Sound Shadows because it was a metaphor for listening for shadows instead of looking for shadows. And so that's sort of how they did it. Now you might wonder, what in the world does teaching blind students photography have to do with social entrepreneurship? Well, I'll tell you. As Chris said, I've been involved in social entrepreneurship for 10 or 15 years. I'm also a visual artist, so I'm interested in seeing, just in general. And one thing I'll point out is that I've sort of noticed how much I take for granted seeing ideas in the world. It's all throughout our culture, all throughout our language. In the front of the book, Robert Coles points out how the word I and the word I are indistinguishable to the ear. That's a sort of visual-centric thing. But there's also a lot of other language that maybe we take for granted. And here's some examples. What you see is what you get. Seeing is believing. When will she see the light? We'll just have to wait and see. I'll see you later. Look out. Watch yourself. I'll look into that. It's all in the eye of the beholder. That's a great vision statement. She's a visionary. He is so short-sighted. See what I mean? One of the things I learned in putting this book together is that it wasn't about blindness. It was really about seeing and how all of us see and don't see. And I learned how important that was. I learned a lot about myself through the process, and I learned a lot about what it means to be a social entrepreneur. And you'll see this sort of in the stories that I show you, and I'm going to show you some slides. So I'm going to tell you a couple stories and link them to how we see and don't see. And what I ask you to do is find yourself in these stories. Don't look at them as like these pictures and these stories from kids 10 years ago at Governor Moorhead School in North Carolina, and they're not like me. I want to ask people to find themselves in it. And there were 5 ways of seeing that sort of emerged from the project and emerged from the work. And so that's sort of how I'll tell the stories. So these are the 5. Distortion, refraction, reflection, transparence, illuminance. They're more metaphors, so I'll go into them. Okay. Distortion. Distortion is that we don't see the world as it is. Things get in the way of how we see the world. This picture, Merlette took. Merlette has been totally blind since birth. And she was afraid of the leaf blowers. This is a leaf blower, and the lawnmowers on campus. And it's a residential school, as I had explained. And so there was a quad and buildings all around. And when the lawnmower was in the middle of the quad mowing the lawn, it was loud, and it would bounce off every wall and cascade and become louder. And she got really afraid of them, and she imagined the lawnmowers chasing her around campus. And then one of the interesting things, too, around fear is that sometimes we mistake, and it's just what the mind does is we mistake salience for probability. When something's salient, we think it's more probable that it'll happen. She decided to actually confront her fear. Decided to do a photo story and interview all the maintenance workers and folks that did the lawn and leaf blowing on campus. And this is a picture another student took of her doing an interview with one of the maintenance workers. And then this is a picture of her on the lawnmower that she was so afraid of. Just loving life. There's a lot of other ways that distort our way of seeing. Having doubt, fear is one. Another one is standards, other people's standards. And this is a picture of Wendy, taken by John. Another picture of Wendy in the cafeteria. There's Wendy at the fair, and Wendy on campus, and Wendy everywhere. And she came back in the rolls, and as we sat there and the photographs would come back in their rolls of film, and we would describe every picture to them because a third of the kids had low vision, so they could actually see the prints if they held them close. A third had light perception, so they could tell which way the sun was coming to take a picture. And a third had no vision at all. So we had to be their eyes. We had to describe the pictures that they were taking. So for John, we would describe his pictures, and there was all these pictures of Wendy in it, and he'd be like, "Is there a girl in there? And what does she look like? And can you describe her? And is she pretty?" And he was so interested that she was pretty. And of course, the right answer is, yeah, she's pretty. She has a really cute smile. And then she'd say, "That's my girlfriend." That he let on later. That's his girlfriend. He really cared what we thought about what his girlfriend looked like, and he couldn't see his girlfriend. And he did it because he took the pictures because he wanted to show his parents, who lived 2 hours away in Wilmington on the coast, what his girlfriend looked like. That's important. He wanted to show his parents what his girlfriend looked like. So he couldn't do that until somebody said, "Use a camera." But that he cared so much about what the sighted world thought about. And I'm saying, I feel like I'm that way. I have these standards that I adopt based on my friends, my parents, the media, and it distorts my sense of how I see the world. I guess what I want to put out to folks is what distorts the way you see the world when you do the work you do with your colleagues, your organizations, the communities you work with, the issues you try to work on to solve. What distorts the way you see the world? The second way of seeing is refraction. And that is that we only see fragments of the world. Refraction, and you all might know from high school physics, is when light goes through a prism and breaks into its parts. And you see a rainbow. So you can actually see the pieces of light, red, violet. But it's about fragments. It's about fragmenting the world. And so I'm going to tell two stories. So this, what is this? What does it look like to folks? A noose. What else? A swing? A noose and a swing are the two top answers survey says. Now it's usually, it's a noose first and a swing. But it's actually the handle that rings the bell in the bell tower on the middle of the campus at Governor Moorhead School. But it's this great illustration of the gap in perception and how if we lead with our eyes, which we all did because we're all looking at the picture, we might be totally misled about what the world is because we're looking in a piece of the world that actually doesn't at all look like what it is. And the other example is when you break the world into its parts, sometimes you can see the world better. And so this is a picture Tamika took looking up a tree, and you see just a piece of the tree, but you get to see what the tree feels like here. You can see how rough it is, and I would have never thought to take the picture this way. But by looking in on a piece of something, you can actually, it's like when we do analysis, we have to break down problems into parts to be able to analyze them. That's a way of seeing the world in a different way. So it helps us see the world. So the question that I have for you is, what do you help others see in your sort of expertise? And the other question is, what fragments of the world do you mistake for the whole? And when I ask this question, I think of my yoga teacher who I was like, okay, I'm stressed. And they're like, yoga will solve it. And then they'll be like, okay, my back hurts. Yoga will solve it. And then I'll be like, I have a urinary tract infection. And they'll be, yoga will solve it. So I think all of us, have that way of responding in our own specialty. The third way of seeing is reflection, which is seeing yourself and knowing yourself and the whole journey of exploration. So you know what perspective you come from. This is a picture of Travis Lucas. Travis was one of 38 students that had taken the class over the time we did it. Travis is one of 2 students who have died since the class ended, and he died of heart failure. Travis identified as African American. He referred to himself that way. Everything in his sort of style, things he liked. He wanted to live in South Central LA. He did a whole photo story about South Central LA, and he'd never left North Carolina. And he got so excited about it. So that was sort of who Travis was. And then when he did this picture, self-portrait, he said, this is a picture of my real face, which in the context of that was just so striking. This is a picture Antonio took. He said, I'm Antonio, I'm showing my muscles. And then he said, this is my cousin Lira trying to be like me. And it's a mask that Antonio had made at school. In reflection, my question is to you is, how different is the mask you wear from who you really are? And I don't ask that in at all a judgmental way, because I think you need to wear masks. When we're leaders and we need to project a mask of confidence around an issue that we're fighting for, or in our organizations, it's so key for leadership. But sometimes that also can create gaps in how we see ourselves and can lead to distortions and other things. The fourth way of seeing that emerged from the work is transparency. And transparency is about relationships. It's about being candid and open and connected to the world. It's about breaking down the walls that divide us. And this is a picture I took of Billy taking a picture of Merlet on the right and Reba on the left. And as you can see, actually, Billy's not holding it up to his eyes, even though he's holding it up to his head. So he's not looking through it, but he's sort of going through the motions that you do when you take pictures. And so he was taking this picture, and then this is the picture he took, which I think is beautiful. So I had interviewed Merlet, who's on the right. We were talking, we tape recorded a couple of the interviews, so that ended up being in the book. And so I was talking to Merlet, and Merlet said, I don't like white people. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't like white people? She was like, I don't like white people. And she told a story about how her brother was arrested by mistake, and things we've all heard about problems with white people. And so she, I don't mean to just say black and white. I know that's just binary. So, but either way, so she said she didn't like white people, and I said, what about your best friend Reba? She's white. And she said, she is? I said, yeah, she is. And I go, you didn't know she was white? And she goes, don't ask me, I don't know. And then I said, she doesn't act white? And then I said, how does she act? And she said, like us. Like us. I mean, I just love that phrase, like us. I mean, it totally, right, in one phrase, 2 words, breaks down the us and the them that divides people. It's like us. It's not that our sight, the way we look at people, the judgments that come up and they get in the way, divide us. And we think somebody's other or different. And not to say there's not differences, there certainly are differences, but to have that approach to the world, like us, the possibilities are just immense. So I'm going to tell you a personal story that's a little bit of an aside that connects within transparency. I joined 150 people from many different countries and at least 6 major religious traditions that gathered 10 years ago to sit in silence for 5 days at Auschwitz-Birkenau. I hope I can get through this. we sat for 5 days in silence at Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp in Poland. When we first arrived, we began a typical guided tour. It's ones that school children get every day. We walked down the same stairs to the first gas chamber and crematorium that thousands of people walked to their death. Heaving cries came from our group and echoed in the chambers like from a deep well. I was moved, but I'm chagrined to admit that my heart was still cold. I saw exhibits of items which Nazi soldiers removed from people before they were gassed. Piles of spectacles, children's shoes, and women's hair that Nazis sold to make burlap and rugs. It moved me, but my heart was still cold. I saw pictures of children who looked like skeletons, of dead bodies stacked on the ground because they couldn't be cremated fast enough. It moved me, but my heart was still cold. And then we sat for 5 days in silence. We hor talis and said the Jewish Kaddish together. We sang Christian hymns. We recited Sufi zikrs. And we read thousands of names of people who died in the barracks and the gas chambers around us. And we sat together for hours on the rocks that bore witness to such suffering, and the train tracks that brought over 1.6 million Jews, gypsies, Polish political prisoners, gay people, and children to their deaths, although the vast majority were Jewish. And then it was my turn to read 100 names. We each got 100 names of people who were killed right where I was sitting. Wagner, Helene. Wagner, Elise. Wagman, Mina. Wagman, Simon. Wagman, Delman. Wagman, Leopold. Wagner, Adam. Wagner, Adolf. I had stayed up hours the night before practicing. I wanted to pronounce each name perfectly. And it wasn't until I took the time to be near and hold those names, to be near and hold that place, that my heart was cracked. And I understood the history and the horror of the Holocaust like I had never had before. I wasn't going to bring this up, but I keep this with me. This is the rock from the tracks where we sat. And what's interesting about this rock in particular is that it has a side that's white, and you hold it and you can't see the dark side. You can't see the side behind. So it connects a little bit to the mask stuff. It's like, what do we show the world versus the full thing that we're made of. Robert Coles, in the foreword to the book, actually has this great statement, and he says, "To be literally blind is far from fun, no question. But to be blind to others in the subjective or moral sense is a darkness all its own." So I realized that I had maintained this idea of us and them. That was the whole thing. To go back to Merlet, I had this whole idea of us and them, and it was protecting me. It insulated me. It numbed me. And my heart, that's why my heart remained cold. And so the question that I have for you and for me is, where does your heart remain cold? When I read this the other night, I hadn't thought about it for 10 years. And it came back to me, and I just realized how my heart had just gotten cold again. Like it's a hard journey. And I guess what I do is I try to remember Millet. I try to remember like us, like when I do community work, and I think all of us should. When we do any of the work we do, just remember what Millet said. She said, like us. And one of the friends at the retreat actually said that there's a 100,000-mile journey between us and them. And it's a journey, a 100,000-mile journey that's just 1 foot between our heads and our hearts. And it's 100,000 miles because it's a hard journey. And I'm going to tell you a story that gave me hope around this, and it comes from the book. So this is illuminance, the fifth way of seeing, which is seeing a bigger picture or seeing beyond sight. So this is a picture, as you can imagine, when blind kids take pictures, they point at the ceiling and the ground, and you get a lot of those pictures back. So I thought this was a mistake. I thought LaWanda took a picture of the sidewalks accidentally meant to get a friend or a tree on campus. And I was about to discard them when I'd tell her she got the sidewalks and put it to the side. And she goes, no, I wanted to take a picture of the cracks in the sidewalk because they're a problem. My cane gets stuck in them, and I want to get them fixed. And so we sat behind a typewriter, and she wanted to write a letter to the superintendent. And so she wrote, "Dear Dr. Breitweiser, since you have the privilege of sight, since you walk on these cracks every day to your office, and you have the privilege of sight, you probably walk on them every day and don't notice them. But for me, my cane gets stuck. Wheelchairs roll off the sidewalk. It's a problem, and here are pictures as proof of the damage." So she sent them, and they ended up getting fixed, which was awesome. But of course, these cracks represent so much more. They represent cracks across racial lines, gender lines, economic lines, that all of us walk on because we have blind spots, and we don't see them. And what does it take? It takes having people in our lives, having relationships with the world that helps us see all the cracks in the world. We see some of the cracks, all of us see some of the cracks, but we depend on other people to see the cracks. We don't suddenly see the cracks one day and have an epiphany. It's like, it's a constant journey. In fact, if we think our work's done seeing the cracks, then we actually go back into, we go back into distortion. So if we think our work's done, we go right back into distortion. So the question I have for folks is, how do we help each other see the cracks and the pieces, and piece the world back together again? How do we help each other see the cracks and piece the world back together again? Who in your life has shifted how you see the world? So think of like 5 people that have shifted how you see the world. It could be a teacher, a mentor, it could be somebody you don't get along with very well and you never want to see again. But think of 5 people. And I'd like you to ask you to send this postcard to acknowledge some of the people that you thought of just now. And it's a picture from the book, and it's actually a picture that Billy took, and it has a quote on it from Frances, and it says, I asked her, "How do you know not to cut someone's head off in a photo?" And she said, "Just ask the person where they are." This is in the transparency chapter, which is like, okay, how do we not bite somebody's head off at work and just get angry? And just ask them where they are. Ask them what their day was like. Ask them all the stuff they bring to that interaction. Even communities. I mean, communities act in a certain way because of the history that backs up that community. And just ask people where they are. Be up front. So I'd like to ask folks to think of people in your life that shifted how you see and acknowledge it. Thank them. Send this to them. And you can hand it to them or mail it to them. By coming to SEA, you all are on this journey too. You're on this journey with me, and that's why I'm so honored to be in this room. And the question I want to sort of end with here is, how do we lean into experiences and relationships that shift how we see? How do we lean into those more? And that's as individuals. And then as leaders, the question I have is for everybody and for myself is, how do we create opportunities for organizations, for our networks, for our customers, for the world to shift how they see? Thank you very much.